Welcome to the Lost and Foundry Show, where we explore the amazing stories of the men and women impacted at the Foundry Ministries, where lives are reshaped by the hands of God. We also do a deeper dive into the people working at the Foundry, and we hear experts in their field of addiction recovery, experts in prison reentry, as well as serving the homeless. Here at the Foundry, we focus on three main R's. This is the first time you've heard about the Foundry. We focus on rescue, and rescue involves we feed 500 families a week. We also provide emergency services to those going through a crisis in their life. The second R we focus upon here at the Foundry is recovery. We provide addiction recovery services and ministries for 12 months. Over the last year or so, we've had 800 men and women come through our addiction recovery program. And finally, we do prison reentry, our final R, and we help about 150 men a year transition from life inside prison and incarceration and help them transition back into life. It's a 6-month program, and that is what we do here. We are focused on helping reshape lives by the hands of God. We are Christ-centered, and we are passionate about helping permanently transform lives. Also, if you like what you hear today, go to our website and check us out at foundryministries.com. Like us on Facebook. Share the content you hear on this podcast. Give us a 5-star rating. We appreciate that very much. Excited today to have our CEO, Micah Andrews, share his heart about how God brought him to the Foundry Ministries and what God is doing in his life and through his life to impact lives coming through the Foundry Ministries.
Well, John, to kind of adequately tell the story of the last 11 years of my life, I kind of have to go back even further than that, back to when I was about 10 years old. My dad was a pastor and my mom's a school teacher. And it was Christmas about 36 years ago now. And my mom loaded me and my brother and sister up and took us off to the store to do some Christmas shopping. And so we went in and we all had our own buggy, and we were putting gifts in the back, the buggy, and getting ready to check out. And that was just a whole new experience for us because we never shopped for our own Christmas gifts. And then we get home, and my mom gets out the wrapping paper and the tape and makes us all sit down on the floor and wrap the gifts as well, which was even more odd and out of line for what we were used to. And then about halfway through, she looked at us and said, I guess she must have realized we thought these were our gifts and we had bought them for ourselves. And she said, no, these aren't for you. You see, the kids in my classroom at school, if we don't do something for them this Christmas, they're not going to wake up Christmas morning and have anything. Mm-hmm. So these gifts are for them. Wow. And I remember it stood out as one of those markers in my life. I didn't probably realize it at the time, but looking back, I realized it's probably the first time that we understood what it meant that even though we weren't wealthy by any means, that we could make a difference in someone else's life. And so that has had probably one of the most profound impacts of any experience of my life in shaping what has happened for me here over the last 11 years at the Foundry. Went off to college, got a degree in sociology because I love people, right? Then I went into youth ministry for 13 years. And in January of 2008, was just having a restlessness about what was going through, what I was dealing with in my life. Our youth ministry was going really well. It was, I had the desire to be the oldest youth pastor in the history of youth pastors. And in January, as God was kind of working on the inside, I was down in Mobile at a ministers conference with my dad, actually, and just had this moment where I thought, I got to get out of this place. And so I drove down to Dauphin Island. And in January in Dauphin Island, Alabama, nobody's there. And so I sat down on the beach by myself that afternoon and just started asking God, what's going on, Lord? Why is this restlessness inside my heart right now? And just as clear as I've ever heard from the Lord my entire life, I heard him say, if you trust me, step out. And it was an overwhelming statement that resonated in my mind and in my heart, because I said, God, I want to trust you, but I've got a mortgage and a car payment and 2 children to raise and a wife to help take care of. So I'm not so sure about this stepping out part. And as I sat there over the next hour, just contemplating the weight of that thought, a second phrase came to my mind and said, "Draw a line in the sand today."
Wow.
And so I took my finger and I literally drew a line in the sand and wrote the date in the sand, January 17th, 2008. And just had one of those profound moments with God. Took me about an hour and a half to get in the car, after I got in the car, to call my wife. And I'll never forget it. When I called her, her only response was, "It's time."
Wow.
And so we resigned the next week, spent about a 4-week transition, and then stepped out of what we had known for the last 13 years as a comfort zone, because it was not just our livelihood, but it was our church. It was our friends and it was our family. And we felt like in order to get to where we were going, we had to close a door and to step into the next leg of the journey. And then that's how I landed at the Foundry. In those years of church ministry, I probably wasn't aware of the fact that we were exhausted. We were tired. We had given everything that we knew to give to the church. And it was not a bad thing. But after we stepped out of that role, we kind of realized just how tired we were. I don't know that we were hurt or wounded, but maybe just worn out. And so as I came to the Foundry, that again became a piece of what I brought to the table here, realizing that people that serve in ministry get tired, right? They get worn out. There's a weight and a burden that goes with carrying and walking with someone on a spiritual journey that is just a heavy burden. And so that kind of prepared me for the role that I'm in now. Even though I went through several transitions of different positions here at the Foundry. When I first got to the Foundry back in 2008, it was the first week of May, I was hired as the Volunteer and Community Outreach Coordinator. We had never had one of those at the Foundry, so I kind of got to navigate my way through that. But my main responsibility was connecting people from the outside to the heart of this ministry, which I think I was very... looking back, I think God had kind of lined those pieces up for me, because the majority of people that we were connecting with were church people.
Sure.
Well, I had spent 13 years in the greater Birmingham community developing relationships with pastors and youth pastors and congregations across the city. And so that was kind of a natural progression for me. A few years after getting to the Foundry, we changed roles again. And I stepped into the role of Senior Men's Program Director. And at that point, kind of left the development and fundraising side of the ministry and jumped over to the programming side, to where I really got to know the men and women that we serve. Mm-hmm. Again, my story and my history became reality in a beautiful way, because I was reminded again that people are tired, mm-hmm. people are worn out. But for a different reason when I was working with the program participants, right?
Sure.
Because they had been running through addiction all their life. And so it gave me a pretty clear perspective on not necessarily that I needed to know everything about their world as much as they needed to know about a different kind of living in a different world. Did that for a couple of years here at the Foundry as well, for about 4 years, and really helped develop and be a part of some neat things that we did from a recovery program perspective. And then I became our assistant executive director under Pastor Bill Hines, as we were kind of walking through what ultimately was going to be a transition for him out of his role and me into that role as the CEO here at the Foundry. And I used to get frustrated because Bill would say, when people would come to him and ask questions, he'd say, "Go see Micah." And after about 2 years of that, I began to realize, this makes sense to me. He's training me and raising me up.
Sure.
Again, which looking back was just another piece of the puzzle of my journey to get me to where I am today, and have the opportunity to lead an amazing ministry like the Foundry, with such a broad stroke and broad impact. And then January of 2016, we made the transition for me to be the CEO here at the Foundry. And again, John, going all the way back to my childhood, where I experienced the fact that I had the ability to make a difference in someone's life. to the connections and the relationships that I've developed over the years. I believe all of those things put together have really led me to this moment of leadership opportunity here at the Foundry Ministries.
What have you seen as you've been at the Foundry that is unique to the Foundry and the hope and healing that you see people experience that God has brought them here? What, as people are learning, maybe asking questions about the Foundry, what are some things that distinguish the hope and healing of the people that come through our program?
Well, I think the fact that we're a faith-based, Christ-centered program makes us unique from many, but not from all, because there are a lot of other faith-based recovery programs like us. But I believe God gave me something very clear, kind of as a mandate about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, as we were getting ready to make the transition to my leadership here at the Foundry. And it was a phrase. I can tell you exactly where I was driving down the interstate when I believe the Lord birthed that in me. And that phrase was to love first. Because there are a lot of challenges and issues that the men and women that we serve come to the Foundry with. They've got relational issues. They've got legal issues, right? They've got obviously substance abuse issues. And as I went back to the Gospels and had been reading through the Gospels, one of the key messages that I've read time and time again is this idea that the love of Christ makes the difference. And so at the Foundry, we're going to deal with your addiction issues. We're going to help you navigate the pile of problems that addiction has brought with it. But there's one thing that we're going to be laser focused on, and that's loving the men and women that we serve in a way that they've never been loved before. I believe I use a phrase, this first day experience. And I talk to a lot of our program staff to say, my desire is for when a man who has been maybe battling addiction, heroin addiction or alcoholism or whatever, walks into our program, or a woman for that matter, that they lay down that very first night, and before they close their eyes, they think this thought: I have no idea what I've got myself into, but I sure am glad I'm here. And I believe the way you have that kind of impact is by showing the love. It's an unconditional, it's an uncanny love. It's a love that the world doesn't know, right? Because it's a love that comes from men and women that serve on our team, that not only are giving it, but the reason they're giving it is because they've experienced it. Definitely. They know what that love feels like. And so we've actually expanded that phrase over the years to love first and to love most. And so that's kind of, I believe, what makes us unique as a ministry here at the Foundry.
In closing, I wanted to ask if someone that's listening, someone that's watching today, that maybe wherever they're at, they feel lost. Maybe they know Christ, they had to have a personal relationship, but they feel like maybe God has forgotten them. Maybe they have a beach experience and they don't know that their life can really matter. What word of encouragement from your experience, from what you've seen not only in your own life, but in the men and women that you've seen being reshaped by the hands of God, what encouragement would you give today as we close out?
Yeah, there's a passage of scripture that we use here a lot, Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans that I have for you. And you can actually stop it right there and understand and recognize the fact that God has a plan for every person, right? My own choices have deviated from that path and that plan many, many times, but it doesn't change the fact that God has a plan. I believe it goes beyond that, because I believe we were all created with a purpose. There's a reason that we're here. And I believe a lot of people that may have that and sense that lostness, it's because we're trying to find what we were made for. And I believe God has created in each and every one of us a divine purpose that fulfills a role in His plan. And so my encouragement to those would be just that embark on this relentless journey to find what that purpose that God's created you for. And here's the beauty. I tell men and women this all the time here at the Foundry. He's not trying to hide it from you, right? He's not trying to hide this plan and this purpose from you. And maybe you find it and maybe you don't. But I believe through experiences and through opportunities and through people that God navigates our path to ultimately we find the answer to the question of why was I made? What was I created for? Why am I here?
Well, Micah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking time out to share your story of and how God has worked and moved and used the Foundry in a mighty way in your life.
Absolutely, Josh. My pleasure.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us today. One of our big focus that we're excited about right now is Hearts of Hope. Mark your calendars for February 26th is our Hearts of Hope luncheon. There we celebrate the women in our program and the incredible difference that God has done and made in their life. Our theme this year is focused on generational, and we're talking about how one life can change their whole generational line. How one mother can impact her children and grandchildren. How one daughter can impact her mother. And how one life can redirect an entire family. Last year, we kind of changed our format, and we focused on a pre-experience event, and that's what we're doing this year as well. Last year, we focused on how when people can go from addiction to a permanently transformed life and what that looks like. And in our pre-experience room, ladies were able to come in and see from where these ladies came, from their life of addiction, living in a home with no water or no electricity, as they were deep into a life of devastation and destruction, and then how their life has been transformed by the hands of God here at the Foundry through our Foundry way. As they come and they see our system, our process of addiction recovery. In our 5 steps, we do education, case management, counseling, employment readiness, and then aftercare. And the ladies were able to experience and meet the women in our program and hear the testimonies and hear the stories. Hope you will mark your calendars and join us for February 26th at the club. It's going to be an amazing luncheon, an amazing experience for all those that are part of our experience that day. Hope you have a great day. I know that God's going to do something incredible in your life. Keep your eyes open. Pay attention, because God is at work. Have a great day.